welcome, welcome. This is Newfoundland and Labrador Studies 2205. I'm Miss Fleming, and I'm here with you for this course. This is Unit 1 on Culture, Section 1, Lesson 2 on how to describe culture. So, first we're going to begin by reflecting on a few questions. As I ask them, I want you to think about them from your point of view. Firstly, what cultural traits do you share with your neighbors, meaning people who live close to you? Do you have the same culture as someone who lives in another province or in another country? And also, what do you think is the most significant way that culture is expressed in your class, so the people who you've grown up with going to school? Okay. In order to further think about this, we have to examine culture complexes, which we learned about in the last video. Culture complexes teach us a lot about our lives. Some patterns of behavior are practiced in many places around the world, such as, say, playing music, while others, like catching capelin in June or July, are not so widespread. But when we examine the culture complexes that make up our lives, we learn more about ourselves. When you identify where a particular culture complex is found on a map, it is called a culture region. So we're going to take a look at that specifically for describing culture in this lesson. Culture regions can be as small as a neighborhood, so the people who live on your road or your street, or as large as a whole continent, such as Turtle Island, where we live, which some people call North America. And culture regions are generally divided into three categories. The first is local culture, expressions of culture that are not widely practiced. For example, cooking Jig's dinner on Sunday, while that may be common for many families in Newfoundland and Labrador, not all even, it's not common in many other parts of the world. Then there's regional culture, which are expressions of culture that are practiced over a wide geographic area. For example, using chopsticks as eating utensils is common throughout much of East Asia, say. There's one more, and that's popular culture, or media usually calls it pop culture. This is when a culture complex is widely practiced and accepted by people around the world. Pop culture changes frequently and is often promoted commercially through mass media. For example, say eating cheeseburgers at fast food restaurants or using social media. And the thing is, with increased globalization, culture regions are less defined by national boundaries or human-made boundaries anymore. And they're ever evolving. So, for example, social media being a pop culture example. The social media that I used when I was in high school as a elder millennial is very different from the social media used today. I want for us now to take a look at page 41 in your textbook, which is Newfoundland and Labrador selected topics. Want to look at it together? I have some graphics on the next slide, but you might find it easier to see them on the page of your book. So these are figures 1.6 through 1.8, and they're on page 41. So the first one, 1.6, is locations of Chess's Fish and Chips restaurants. If you've ever had fish and chips from Chess's, it is quite delicious. And it opened in St. John's, the original location, in 1951 by Chess Barber. There are various locations now throughout Newfoundland and Labrador. This would be an example of local culture. Next, we have figure 1.7, which is provinces, states, and areas in which Tim Hortons locations are. You can see that it's throughout much of Canada. There's also some in the northern United States. There is a Tim Hortons location on the military base in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And also, since this book was published, there are various locations now throughout the UK as well. This map is an example of regional culture. Lastly, we have 1.8, which is countries in which McDonald's restaurants are located. The key for this map is color-coded, and in the key you can see that there's a various range of colors, and that has to do with when those locations opened. So the goldenrod color are the first locations in much of Canada and the United States, all the way up to the yellow color, which is 2000s to present. This is an example of popular culture. There's two more things I want to identify to you, and that's traditional versus contemporary culture. Other than describing culture spatially, which means by area, by space, you can also describe it temporally, which means in accordance to time. Some culture complexes in the place we now call Newfoundland and Labrador go back thousands of years, even back to, of course, time immemorial, while others are quite recent. Culture traits passed down by our ancestors are referred to as traditional culture, such as celebrations of holidays, like Nalujik Night, or the Victoria Day weekend, for example. Culture traits from modern times are referred to as contemporary culture, which is what much of this section is based on, which is the use of cell phones, for example, to take photos instead of cameras, playing paintball, or arcade games. We're going to focus more on traditional culture later on in the unit. Now it's time to review. I'm going to ask you now to complete the activities below in Brightspace under the Activities section. There's a couple of activities there specifically with maps. I thought we should have a little bit of practice in looking at keys, using scales, and also creating your own culture map. I hope you enjoy them, and I'll see you next time.